It has been 1 month since I started using the iPhone Air, and I've discovered that I am much more willing to compromise than I expected. That doesn't mean Apple's thinnest, super light iPhone is perfect, but it definitely pulls its weight. So let's talk about how I'm feeling now that I've had more time with the Air. This is All Things Mobile. Now, I've already gone in depth on what you'll get with the $999 iPhone Air, so be sure to check out my review if you want more details on that. But for now, I'm going to focus on my key takeaways after making this my primary phone for a month. Let's start by talking about the solo rear 48 megapixel wide-angle camera. There is no ultra-wide or telephoto here, just one lens on the back, but it supports 2x optical quality zoom. Now, I knew this would be an adjustment for me, especially going from the iPhone 16 Pro Max with its triple rear camera system, and at times it did feel limiting to not be able to take 0.5x photos on the Air or punch in closer than 2x for higher quality zoom. So like when I went to the Jonas Brothers concert, for example, I kept the iPhone Air securely in my pocket and relied heavily on the iPhone 16 Pro Max to zoom into Joe Jonas as much as possible because priorities, right? But once I fully embraced the iPhone Air's camera, I was impressed. Photos look sharp, colors are balanced, and quality-wise, I don't see these pictures as being a step down from what you'll get on Apple's other new phones once you take zoom out of the equation. But still, if you're paying almost $1,000 for a phone, I would expect a little bit more. And not to make this a competition, but Samsung's Galaxy S25 Edge is also very thin, but it has that second ultra-wide lens on the back too. So I think Apple can definitely squeeze another lens on there if it really tries, maybe next year. Now, how about that other big potential drawback, the battery? I was actually pretty satisfied with how well the iPhone Air's battery held up on a day-to-day basis for the most part. On days when my screen time was a bit more moderate and I was mostly on Wi-Fi, the Air's battery typically had about 20% to spare by the time I went to bed, which is really great. And then on days when my phone use was a bit heavier and I was mostly out and about using cellular data, my battery drained a lot faster and I couldn't quite make it through a full day without recharging. But somehow this didn't end up being as much of a problem as I expected. I typically charge my phone each night anyway, so on days when I had just a little bit of battery to spare, it honestly made no difference in my routine. And then on those rare days where my battery was totally drained, I made sure I had Apple's handy-dandy $99 MagSafe battery pack, and I was fine. But honestly, I only used that a couple of times, and I just typically didn't even need it. There were really only a few days where I eyed the battery levels apprehensively, and the phone typically held up just fine. Also, even though the iPhone Air only supports up to 20-watt charging, it actually tops off pretty quickly. In a 30-minute charging test, it went from dead to 54%. And the Air also supports Qi 2 wireless charging, and it went from 17% to 64% in half an hour. So if you do need to quickly charge your phone before you head out the door, you can totally do that. Now, ultimately, I do tend to be a rather heavy phone user, which is probably something I should work on. So I prefer having a phone with a bigger battery like an iPhone Pro model so that I don't have to compulsively check what percentage is left. But if you're a light to moderate phone user, I think the iPhone Air's battery will honestly be just enough for you. One of the things that impressed me most about the iPhone Air is how durable it is. Now, I am definitely somebody who likes to slap a case on my phones, but I didn't want anything to come between me and this super thin device, so I boldly went caseless for a month, and thankfully, I have no regrets. I'm telling you, I have tried to bend this thing just for fun to see how much pressure it can take, and it honestly does not budge. Apple actually showed us a demo on its campus where it applied more than 130 pounds of force to the middle of the iPhone Air, and it bent to avoid snapping, but then once the force was lifted, the phone went right back into shape without any cracks or anything. So that made me feel better about just tossing it in my pocket or purse and not worrying about it bending. There have been some reports of people saying there are scratches on their new iPhones. Apple says this was actually the result of material transferring from old in-store MagSafe displays and that those marks can be wiped away. But thankfully, I have not noticed anything on the front or back of my iPhone Air. The only scuffs are on the corner from a water immersion test I did in a fountain that unfortunately had a stone bottom, which I would not recommend doing, but hey, it survived. If a case would help you sleep at night, you can find plenty of thin options like this one from Apple that's less than a millimeter thick. Now, there was one thing that I didn't expect to bother me as much as it did. The iPhone Air has a single speaker up at the top instead of the dual stereo speakers you'll get on other iPhones. Now, most of the time this didn't bother me, but there were definitely moments where I just couldn't handle how lopsided audio sounded when I was watching movies or YouTube videos. And that was, again, disappointing given how expensive this phone is. The Samsung Galaxy S25 Edge has dual speakers, so I would have expected the same here. The audio still sounds clear and loud enough on the Air, but it obviously can't compare with what you'd get on even the baseline iPhone 17, which I think is a pretty major shortcoming. I actually love how much lighter the Air is to hold up when I'm watching videos in bed instead of sleeping at a normal hour, but that compromised audio takes away from the overall viewing experience. It's not a major red flag, but definitely something I'd like to see fixed in future versions of the Air. And yeah, maybe Apple will release another version of the iPhone Air next year, and perhaps it'll add more cameras and longer battery life and better speakers, or maybe it'll use the Air's thin design to finally launch a slim, foldable iPhone to compete with the Galaxy Z Fold 7 or the Honor Magic V5. It's all still very up in the air. You thought I wouldn't slip a pun in there somewhere. But regardless of what's next, the iPhone Air generally does pull its weight. But enough about my thoughts. I'd love to know what you think. If you have an iPhone Air, are you enjoying it, or do you have some regrets? Or if you don't have the Air, are you interested in buying it? Let us know in the comments, and be sure to hit like and subscribe for more on all things mobile. Thanks for watching.